On Thursday, May 26, 2022, 32-year-old Armando Barron was convicted of murdering his wife's coworker, 25-year-old Jonathan Amerault, in a brutal act of jealousy and rage. The crime took place in a remote New Hampshire park near the Massachusetts border, and it didn't end with a gunshot. Armando forced his own wife to decapitate the body. At trial, prosecutors said the motive was simple but deadly: blind, unrelenting jealousy after Armando discovered messages between his wife and Jonathan on Snapchat. Under oath, Brittany Barron testified that her husband beat her, threatened her, and demanded that she take Jonathan's life.
Do it. Shoot him.
What did you tell him back?
No.
Did you say whether you could do this?
I was like, I can't. Yeah, I can't.
Brittany says he then ordered her to stand on his throat.
And I could hear John struggling, he was trying to breathe.
Brittany says Amerault begged for his life and hers, promising to never talk or see her again. Armando, she says, was undeterred.
And John said, what? He said, look at her. Do you still think she's pretty? And John looked at me. He says, yeah, I do.
Marriage can be one of life's greatest sources of joy, but when trust breaks down, it can also become one of life's greatest stressors. According to the 2022 General Social Survey, about 20% of married men and 13% of married women admitted to having sex outside their marriage. Of course, depending on how you define cheating, the numbers climb even higher, up to 70% of married Americans. The emotional fallout from adultery is often severe: betrayal, guilt, depression, broken families, and, for many, divorce. But in some cases, it escalates. A study published in the Journal of Women's Health found that jealousy is often used as a weapon by abusers seeking to control their partners. In those cases, it's not just about heartbreak. It's a warning sign for something far more dangerous: homicide. Jonathan Amerault was born in Rangeley, Maine on January 27, 1995. He was raised and educated in Milford and graduated with honors from the Rochester Institute of Technology in 2018 with a Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering. He worked for Teleflex Medical as a biomedical manufacturing engineer. Jonathan was an avid sports fan with a deep passion for the outdoors, whether it was hiking, snowmobiling, skiing, or riding an ATV. He was active in the region's hiking community, often sharing advice and stories from his adventures on social media. He had climbed 66 of the region's 67 mountains over 4,000 feet, including all 48 peaks in New Hampshire. In addition, he had hiked all but one of the 100 highest peaks in New England. But for Jonathan, who had fallen for someone he couldn't have, the final summit would come not on a mountain trail, but in the shadows of betrayal. Brittany and Armando Barron grew up together in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They married young, teenagers, after what Brittany described in court as pressure from Armando's deeply religious mother, who insisted they were living in sin. In 2007, they tied the knot. The children came quickly, 3 in total. They eventually moved across the country to Jaffrey, New Hampshire, hoping to build a life together. Brittany was the family's breadwinner, working full-time as a machine operator at Teleflex Medical. Armando stayed home to homeschool the kids, but there were signs of instability. Armando didn't have a bank account, no vehicle in his name, no clear employment record. He had once enlisted in the U.S. Army, but later deserted. That's a serious offense under military law, punishable by confinement, loss of pay, dishonorable discharge, and if done in wartime, even death. He was discharged under other than honorable conditions to avoid a court-martial. By 2020, their marriage was cracking. According to Brittany, Armando had cheated on her and physically assaulted her throughout the relationship, although no charges were ever filed. Then came September 12th. Brittany had finally built up the courage to ask for a divorce, but Armando didn't take it well. His response wasn't dialogue, it was a right cross to the face. 1 week later, on Saturday, September 19th, he went through her phone and found flirtatious Snapchat messages between Brittany and a coworker. His name was Jonathan Amerault.
How did you two communicate during that week?
First it was Facebook, and then he said he didn't like Facebook, so we started text messaging each other, just SMS, and then we moved to Snapchat.
And do you remember who set up that Snapchat conversation, him or you?
I don't remember who initiated that.
Okay. I believe you said before that you were logging out of your phone at this time?
I was.
Yeah. Why were you doing that? Explain that for the jury.
I didn't want Armando to see that I was talking to a guy.
Did you ever go with John or see John outside of work?
Yes, I did.
How many times?
Once.
Where did you guys go?
There was a park in Peterborough. Edward McDowell, something like that. It was like a dam. And we went and we parked and talked about work and the people that we worked with and his boss. And
What time of day was this that you guys went and did this?
it was between 3 and 4.
3 and 4 in the
In
afternoon?
the afternoon, yes.
All right, so this is after your shift gets over with.
Right after work, yeah.
Okay. I did take it 3 or 4 afternoons. I'm going to assume daylight outside.
Yes.
What did you explain to him about your relation? I'm sorry. What did you explain to him about what relationship you were looking for? What did you say to him about that?
I said I couldn't offer anything more than friendship. I said, I don't mind getting to know you, like you're a very nice person, but I don't even know if I like you, at this point. I don't know what kind of music you listen to. I don't know if you can, if I can just be around you as a friend, you know what I mean? So, I don't mind getting to know you, but I can't promise you anything more than that.
Was it in your mind when you said stuff like this, were you these questions that you had that you wanted answered before to see whether or not to start a relationship with him?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Were these questions that were in your mind, what music you listened to, getting to know him, were you asking these questions because in your mind you were thinking about maybe starting a relationship with him?
I thought there might have been potential, but I wasn't planning on a relationship.
Okay. Did you tell him that you were, at the time that you had asked for a divorce from Armando before you met him? Met with him and went out to McDowell Park?
I did.
So you knew that?
Yes.
Okay. After you sat with him there at the park and you guys are talking,
Yes.
what was so special about Jonathan?
He was very kind. He was very sweet. He was really funny. And he didn't show that on the floor because he was in professional mode, but he was really funny.
How was he different when you were in person with him here at the park? When you say he's in professional mode?
Yeah, he doesn't really joke around and he doesn't really talk very much if it's not about work. And seeing his personality outside of work, I was like, man, you're really cool. You're a really cool guy.
So, were there other people at the park while you were meeting with him there?
I think there was one other car parked there.
Okay. And you guys were just in a parking lot?
Yeah.
How did Jonathan get you back to Teleflex?
He drove me back.
And is this his car? Is that the Subaru? Do you know?
Impreza, yeah.
When he, at the end of that time together when you were at the park, was there any physical touching or interaction between the two of you?
Yeah, so he dropped me off outside the big parking lot, the main employee entrance.
The one in the back?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Why there?
because I didn't want Armando to see, like, if Armando ended up showing up, I didn't want him to see that I was being dropped off by anybody. Like, I was supposed to be at work.
Okay. So when he drops you off, where do you go?
Straight inside, and then I went out to the other exit and went to my car. Like,
Okay. So let me go back to my other question. Was there any kind of physical interaction between you and Jonathan at the end of that trip to the park?
yes, I kissed him
Where were you guys when you kissed him?
right out the door, right outside the door.
Right outside the employee door there? At
Yes.
the back?
He was in the driver's seat and I was in the passenger, and I said, "I'm gonna kiss you right now." And then he leaned forward, and I, like, literally gave him a peck, and then I was like, I ran away like a little. I was just, like, so embarrassed. I was like, I don't know what I just did.
Felt awkward?
Yeah, like, it was just like a little peck, and then I was like, I'm okay, and I got out of that car as soon as possible.
Was there any other time that you guys, and that's on Wednesday,
Yes,
16th.
yes,
Was there any other time that you guys had ever kissed?
yes.
When?
That Friday morning, we had a break in his car.
Tell us about that.
We were just talking, and we were talking about work. We had a new automotive part that was on the line that he was working on and trying to get up and running. And then he just leaned over and he kissed me.
How was that?
Different than the first time. It was longer. It wasn't just a peck.
And just 2 days later, Jonathan was the subject of a news announcement.
State police looking for a missing 25-year-old man from Keene. Police say that Jonathan Amerault was reported missing after he failed to show up for work in Jaffrey. His family hasn't heard from him since Saturday. He may be driving a gray Subaru Impreza with New Hampshire plates. Anyone with information asked to contact state police.
Jonathan's mother knew something was off. Her son, responsible, punctual, hadn't shown up to work on Monday, September 21st, and she hadn't heard from him in nearly 2 days. She called his employer, Teleflex Medical. They hadn't heard from him either. Worried, she contacted Keene Police and asked for a welfare check at his home on West Diane Drive. Officers arrived to find the house empty and his charcoal gray Subaru Impreza gone. Detectives followed up with Teleflex, who confirmed Jonathan never reported for his shift. But there was something else. Another employee also missed work that morning. Unlike Jonathan, though, she had called in to resign. That employee was Brittany Barron. Staff also mentioned that the two were rumored to be romantically involved, even though Brittany was married. That detail pointed investigators toward Jaffrey, New Hampshire. At a modest multifamily home with an attached apartment, detectives spoke with Armando Barron's mother. She said Brittany and Armando had gone hiking in northern New Hampshire and she was watching their children. When asked where the couple lived, she pointed to the apartment next door. Officers left with the information, but they weren't done. Later that night, around 10:20 p.m., they returned. A 2008 Jeep Patriot was parked out front. It was registered to Armando's mother's boyfriend, and this time, Armando was home. When officers asked where his wife was, Armando said he hadn't seen her since 2 a.m. Sunday. He claimed she told him she was going camping with friends, so he dropped her off near Temple Mountain. He said he was too distraught over the state of his marriage, so he just continued driving, ended up in Errol, New Hampshire, some 195 miles away, and later turned around. He told officers he and Brittany had been texting until around 7 a.m. that morning. But while police were hearing one story from Armando, another was starting to unfold. Investigators spoke with one of Brittany's close friends, who handed over a string of group texts sent between Sunday morning and Monday afternoon. In those messages, Brittany said she wouldn't be seeing her children anytime soon, that she was starting over in New Mexico where her sister lived, and that she'd taken a new job. She also messaged Jonathan directly, saying she couldn't talk to him anymore and needed space from Armando. Curiously, when asked where she was, Brittany wouldn't say. Nearly a full day after Jonathan was reported missing, 2 hunters headed into Wayside Park to check on a bear baiting site they had recently set up. They drove down the trail to make sure no one had wandered too close to their bait. When they arrived, they spotted something unexpected, a tent. They honked their horn, and a woman emerged with a small dog. She was wearing sunglasses, and right away the hunters noticed she seemed to be hiding something: her eyes. They told her the area was an active hunting site just about 100 yards from where she was camped and informed her that overnight camping wasn't allowed on the property. She claimed she didn't know about the hunting site or the no camping rule. After leaving the woods, the hunters contacted the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department to report the violation. Later that day, 2 fish and game officers arrived at the site. As they approached the tent, a dog began barking. A woman, Brittany Barron, stepped out from a worn path to the side of the tent. The officers immediately noticed a pistol secured in a pouch around her waist. Just behind her was a large brown tarp covered in sticks and branches, an obvious attempt to conceal whatever was underneath. The officers told her she needed to leave immediately as she was trespassing. As Brittany gathered her things and walked toward one of the patrol vehicles, she muttered under her breath, "I'm in big trouble." While she packed, one of the officers noticed drag marks in the mud leading to another brown tarp, this one shaped unmistakably like a human body. Brittany was detained on the spot and transported to the Berlin Police Department for questioning. Meanwhile, back at the campsite, officers lifted the first tarp. Underneath was a gray Subaru Impreza registered to Jonathan Amerault. Then they peeled back the second tarp to find a decapitated human body. At the station, detectives pressed Brittany for answers, and that's when she began to tell them, step by step, about Armando's plot to end Jonathan Amerault.
Brittany Barron testified Wednesday about the plot her husband laid out in September of 2020 to lure Jonathan Amerault to a park. Armando Barron allegedly used her phone to message him.
At one point, he stomps on his face.
Brittany described a relentless assault when the 25-year-old engineer arrived, and then the moment Armando allegedly forces her to join in.
Kill him. Do it. Shoot him.
What did you tell him back?
No.
Did you say whether you could do this?
I was like, I can't. Yeah, I can't.
Brittany says he then ordered her to stand on his throat.
And I could hear John struggling, he was trying to breathe.
Brittany says Amerault begged for his life and hers, promising to never talk or see her again. Armando, she says, was undeterred.
And John said, "What?" He said, "Look at her. Do you still think she's pretty?" And John looked at me. He says, "Yeah, I do."
Brittany says her husband forced John Amerault into the hatchback of his own car headfirst. John's last words were, "I thought you were going to let me live," before Armando shot Amerault 3 times.
And John says, "Wait, I thought you were going to let me live." And Armando said, "Yes, that means both of us liars."
After Brittany's statement, authorities moved fast. There was enough probable cause to get Armando on domestic assault. However, investigators also feared for the safety of the Barron's 9-year-old daughter, who may have witnessed part of the violence. Apprehending Armando became the top priority. A BOLO alert was issued and the phone was pinged. The data showed he was no longer driving the Jeep. He was heading north, back toward Errol. At 7:25 p.m., a detective left him a message. Armando returned the call using a different number. When the detective explained they were investigating Brittany's disappearance and asked him to come to the station, Armando became defensive. "I don't understand," he said. "I've been fired from jobs many times for not showing up, and nobody ever came looking for me like they're looking for Brittany." The detective replied, "We have a missing person. We need to physically see her. We can't just take your word for it." Armando claimed the last time he spoke to Brittany was Monday at 5 p.m. He said he couldn't come in because he had plans to go camping and wanted to explain the situation to their daughter. When the detective offered to meet halfway in Bristol, Armando responded, "Can't do that. I don't want my daughter seeing me talking to police." He eventually agreed to drive to Jaffrey, but he never showed. Instead, his phone was tracked heading in the opposite direction through Franconia. It was clear he had no intention of meeting with police. On September 23rd, Armando's Jeep was found abandoned in a business parking lot. That morning, officers executed a search warrant at the Barron home.
I got it.
Police Department, search warrant! Open the door! Police Department, search warrant! Open the door!
Move.
Armando's mother answered the door. She said her son wasn't home, that he was stockpiling food due to the COVID pandemic. She added that around 10 a.m. the day before, Armando and his daughter had supposedly gone grocery shopping, but officers noticed a second vehicle was missing, a gold 2008 Toyota Tundra, also registered to her boyfriend. It did not take long before that truck was located and pulled over. Behind the wheel was Armando Barron. His daughter sat in the passenger seat. Inside the vehicle, in plain view, police saw bags of topsoil, quick-dry cement, a shovel, and a blue tarp. Not a single grocery bag. He was arrested immediately for assaulting Brittany. At the time, officers observed scratches and dried blood on his wrist and forearm. He was Mirandized and asked for a lawyer. Meanwhile, the 9-year-old was interviewed by a forensic specialist. She confirmed her parents had argued days earlier, but said her grandmother moved her before she could see anything else. Later that day, Brittany led police to Annette Wayside Park. There, they recovered Jonathan's belongings, his ID, credit cards, garage door opener, and located the shallow grave where his head was buried. On September 24th, an autopsy was performed which documented bruises inside Jonathan's mouth and on his face, along with a distinct shoe impression on the right side of his head. The injuries corroborated Brittany's account that she had been ordered to step on Jonathan's neck. The cause of death, a gunshot wound to the head. The manner, homicide. That same day, Brittany Barron was arrested for her role in Jonathan's death, but not for murder.
I want to discuss what you were and were not charged with in terms of crimes. You were charged, as you said yesterday, with falsifying physical evidence?
Yes,
And 3 counts of that, correct?
that is correct.
1 count for cleaning Mr. Amerault's vehicle.
Yes,
A 2nd count for wrapping his body in a tarp and
yes,
dragging it into the woods.
that's correct.
And then the 3rd count for decapitating Mr. Amerault's body.
Yes,
And the same prosecutors that are here in this courtroom, Attorney Agati and Attorney Chase, they were the prosecutors on your case as well.
that's correct.
And they made the decision what to charge you with and what not to charge you with.
Objection, Your Honor.
You were not charged with assaulting Mr. Amerault.
No, I was not.
You were not charged with standing on his neck.
No, I was not.
Not charged with slitting his wrists.
No, I was not.
And you were charged with killing him.
No, I was not.
You pled guilty, as you said yesterday, to those 3 charges of falsifying physical evidence,
I did.
pursuant to a plea agreement that you discussed yesterday.
That is correct.
A plea agreement that you and your attorney made with Attorney Agati and Attorney Chase.
That is true.
And under the terms of that plea agreement, you have already been released from the prison.
That is true.
You recently met with those same prosecutors, correct? Attorney Agati and Attorney Chase?
That is correct.
And met with them prior to your testimony yesterday?
That is correct.
Met with them to prepare your testimony?
To prepare myself for the trial.
And to testify at this trial?
Ultimately, yes.
Although Brittany Barron was not charged with murder, her role in the cover-up was serious. She faced multiple felony charges, including falsifying physical evidence and abuse of a corpse. But her cooperation with authorities and her willingness to testify would soon place her at the center of the state's case against Armando. And when the trial finally began, it was clear Prosecutors intended to let Brittany do the talking. In their opening statements, the prosecution laid out a chilling timeline of control, violence, and manipulation, arguing that Armando had turned a marital dispute into a calculated execution.
Back in September of 2020, the defendant terrorized two people. One of them he beat and bloodied. The other he murdered. On September 19th, 2020, three people went into the woods that you all walked through. One of them was tricked into going there. One of them was forced at gunpoint into those woods. One of them, him, the defendant, he went there to hurt and to kill. The one who was forced into those woods was Brittany Barron, the defendant's wife. This is how Brittany left those woods. She left beaten, she left bruised, and she left bloody. These pictures were taken days apart. You can see the swelling going down. You can see the bruising, the hemorrhaging in her eyes. She was beaten, she was bloody, and she was terrified. The person who was tricked into going into those woods was beaten too, but much worse. These diagrams were made at Jonathan Amerault's autopsy. They show the injuries the defendant inflicted to Jonathan's head after the defendant beat him, cut him, and stomped on his head. On the diagram on the left, every one of those marks is a separate injury. Injuries to the front of his head, to his face, to the left side of his head, to the right. And to the right, that's an x-ray of Jonathan's head. Those two white dots you see are the bullets that he put into Jonathan's head before they left. As for the defendant, you may be wondering what he looked like when he left the woods that night. That is how the defendant looked. He looked just like he does right now. Not a single bruise, cut, or scratch on his face. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But in this case, these pictures, all of that and more, they tell you the story. They tell you who was beat, who was doing the beating. They tell you who had the gun. They tell you who was in control. They show you what this case is about the defendant's rage, about his jealousy, about his control. That's why the defendant assaulted. That's why the defendant tortured, and that's why he murdered.
The defense painted a very different picture. In her opening statement, Armando's attorney didn't deny that Brittany helped dispose of Jonathan's body, but she suggested something far more provocative.
The wrong person is on trial for the murder of Jonathan Amerault. You are sitting here to determine the guilt or innocence of Armando Barron, the man the prosecution and police have accused of murdering Jonathan Amerault. The real murderer did not have to go through a trial. The real murderer has not had to face the terrible facts of this brutal, senseless, and vicious murder. The real murderer never faced a jury. The real murderer was not even charged in Jonathan Amerault's death. In fact, you are going to hear testimony from the real murderer during this trial. The state is going to ask you to believe every claim she makes. and to convict Armando Barron largely based on her testimony. Her name is Brittany Barron. Armando Barron did not kill Jonathan Amerault.
Over the course of the trial, jurors heard Brittany's harrowing testimony, saw photos from the crime scene, and reviewed the physical evidence, including the murder weapon, the tarps, and Jonathan's blood-stained car.
The noise must have been awesome, just phenomenally loud. And it wasn't 3 shots. It wasn't that fast. You heard that there was pause in between. And Jonathan makes a noise. And Jonathan makes a noise. And Jonathan makes a noise.
The prosecution argued that Armando Barron was a controlling husband who lured Jonathan to his death, then forced Brittany to cover up the crime out of fear for her own life. The defense had a different theory. They suggested Brittany wasn't the victim, she was the aggressor. They claimed she had a motive, that she lied to investigators, and that Armando wasn't even present when the murder happened. They pointed to inconsistencies in her statements and argued that the real killer was the one sitting in the witness chair, not the defendant. But after days of emotional testimony and graphic evidence, the jury made their decision. It was time for the verdict.
Jury, Your Honor.
Seated, everyone. So I understand that the jury's rendered a verdict. Now my clerk will take the verdict. Mr. Barron, you should stand.
If you would face the jury, Mr. Barron. Would the foreperson of the jury please stand up? Madam Foreperson, case 213-2020 CR 308, has the jury reached a verdict?
We have.
How say you in charge number 1857629C, charging the defendant Armando Barron of first-degree murder? Do you find the defendant Armando Barron guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
You find the defendant guilty?
Yes.
So say you all, ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Yes.
Madam Foreperson, with respect to charge ID 1857643C, charging the defendant Armando Barron with kidnapping, do you find the defendant Armando Barron guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
That is guilty?
That is guilty.
So say you all, ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Yes.
It took the jury just 3 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts, including first-degree murder. The following day, Armando Barron was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder in New Hampshire. Additionally, he received an extra 45 to 135 years for related charges, including kidnapping and criminal solicitation, ensuring that even if death somehow forgot him, the justice system wouldn't. Before the sentencing concluded, Jonathan Amerault's father, Kenny, addressed the court. What he said wasn't loud or angry. It didn't need to be. It was the voice of a grieving father, calm, direct, devastating.
Here we are again. I see you ain't wearing a suit today. I guess that doesn't help in this case. It's official. You are a murderer, a butcher, leech. In other words, I won't use with respect to the court today. You're a coward. You had to ambush and attack John with knives, machete, guns to take him down. A wife beater. Disgusting, despicable. You mentioned to John you have a revolver called the judge. Now we have another judge here today who will decide your miserable future. I saw that you bought fast-setting concrete also, mix, and never got to use it. But don't worry. Where you're going, you will be surrounded by plenty of concrete to bang your head against in frustration with being caught. The only good thing I see about all this heinous crime is that you are not 40 years old, 50 or 60, but only 30 years old. You have a long, long time to fade away and rot in prison.